So would you believe me if I was knocking down 3,500 to 4,000 calories a day and still saying between 10 to 12% body fat? Most people come to me, your body is in a deficit year round, and no wonder why nothing's moving. With most people in leadership positions, is you are letting your environment control you. We have to create an environment where we're building these mental calluses, and we have to start small. You're listening to the Nick Burns Show. This is your one-stop shop for all mindset, leadership, fitness, and oil and gas and energy industry. If you're a leader in the energy space and you're wanting to get more knowledge on the health and wellness space and how you're serving your community and your business, this is where you're at. So would you believe me if I was knocking down 3,500 to 4,000 calories a day and still saying between 10 to 12% body fat? Well, we're going to get into it today because I think there's a big misconception around nutrition. And oftentimes I see a lot of people going to the gym 3, 4, 5 times a week, not really focusing at all on their food and what actually they're putting into the mouth. And that is probably half of the game, because you can't go to the shoe store and only buy the left shoe. And so that's what I tell a lot of people when it comes to nutrition. It is 90% of the game, but it has way more to do with metabolic tension in the body than it is just eating clean, because we could still gain weight, not lose weight, still eating chicken and rice and broccoli all day. But we all know that is not what we can do for the next 20, 30 years. And this is why people go in these all or nothing approaches as far as food. So how I'm able to eat this much food and still be able to stay lean. Most people who come to us are under eating. We've mentioned that in prior episodes. So what happens when you are under eating, your body is in this fight or flight mode, meaning we don't know when the body's going to eat again. So naturally what it's trying to do is trying to conserve energy. So if we're not eating energy, it's conserving energy based on what we already have in store in the body. So what happens when we're severely under eating, this is called metabolic adaptation. So what happens is the body is in this quote fight or flight mode. Metabolism starts to adapt. So what happens over time, and this used to be me for years, is my body was in this catabolic environment where nothing what I was doing was working. I was going to the gym 3 to 5 days per week, cardio almost every single day, and nothing was moving on the scale. And so what I realized is what is happening internally with my hormones, with my stress levels in my body, cortisol, and my food. And so what happens over time is I realized I just probably wasn't eating enough. And this is what I talk about for so many people is we go in, especially in these initial stages of people coming to our program, we understand exactly how much they're eating, where they're eating, or what other nutritional habits and their deficiencies, so we know where to start. And everyone is under eating and has the problem. But what we find is if you're eating 1,200 calories for a man that's 6 foot, 250 pounds, your body's going to start to conserve everything. Your metabolism starts to adapt over time, which is really cool. And a lot of this is called reverse dieting. And so what happened when I was out of the military, training, it was Ranger training, 2 tours overseas, we would be training all day, every day, but our body's constantly moving. And what I found was my body truly never changed until I started to eat more food. And so what happens was really cool, because a person comes into our program, loses 20, 40, 60 pounds, you will hit a spot where your body stops moving. It hits very hard plateaus. I call this metabolic adaptation. And so what happens, you can keep cutting calories, you can keep doing more work in the gym, but nothing will seem to budge. And it's because your body is saying, no more. And so what happens, you have to reverse diet yourself. And so how I'm able to hit 4,000 calories is I've reverse dieted myself over years of metabolic restoration. So what I mean by that is literally you might go through a progress, and this is why I always tell people your body can't always be in a deficit year round. And most people come to me, your body is in a deficit year round, and no wonder why nothing's moving, because the body doesn't want that. You're below its homeostasis. And so what happens, we have to give people more food in order to resurrect that, what's happening in the body. So typically what happens, and why I'm able to eat this much, and this is kind of where I want to get to, is that say year 1, I get into my fitness journey, okay, and I lose 20, 40 pounds. I'll go from 3,000 calories down to 2,000. I have to reverse diet myself out of that in order for my body to keep the weight loss. And what happens when I reverse out of that, I go through a hypertrophy phase. That hypertrophy phase, I get my calories back up to gain more muscle, right? And then after that, I cut myself down. Well, what happens next year, right? When I put on more muscle and my metabolism becomes better because I put on more muscle, next year, where maybe the beginning of the year I went down to 2,000 calories, next year is 2,200. Then the next year is 24 and 26 and 28. So by going through these cycles of cutting down, reversing, going through a hypertrophy phase, cutting myself down again, reversing, going through a hypertrophy phase, this is this cycle, right? And so, no, I wasn't able to eat 3,500 calories, year one of my fitness journey, but over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, what before were the most amount of, or the least amount of calories that I got to was around that 2,000. Now is somewhere around that 28, 29, 3,000 mark. So over years of restoring metabolism and going through these cycles, I'm able to eat this 35 to 4,000 calories per day and still staying very lean. So when we're talking about macronutrients, everyone doesn't know what it means. And I always tell people all the time, if you don't know macros, you're just eating coffee or drinking coffee with a fork, right? Because it is the foundation for everything when it comes to nutrition. Okay, your carbs, your fats, your proteins. Okay, they're your macronutrients. Your micronutrients are things like, your sodium levels, your magnesium, all these other things that we look at, your fiber. So macronutrients. And this is the key. And I think this is probably the biggest thing that you need to understand about your macronutrients. Each one, proteins, your fats, your carbs, has what's called a thermic effect of food, right? TEF. So what happens, your body produces more energy just to break that down. So when we're talking about things, protein is the most, or the highest thermic effect of food. It's 20% of your calories that you eat from protein is just used to break it down. So if you do the math, if I eat 1,000 calories of protein per day, 20% of that is just used just to break it down, meaning it's free. So your body is the thermic effect of using those energy to break it down, and it creates more metabolic. So what happens is the more protein you eat, the more metabolic you are. The more often you eat it, the more metabolic you are. The more you eat of it, the more metabolic you are. So the thermic effect of food is huge. So there's 4 calories per gram for each proteins and carbs, and there's 9 for fats. So if you eat 1,000 calories from protein and 1,000 calories from carbs and 900 from fat, you have a 2,900 calorie day. And so this is really important to understand the math behind things, because now you have systems. And I'll talk about systems a lot, because if you don't understand the numbers, because everything when it comes to nutrition is a numbers game. Yes, we all want to eat clean, whole millily processed foods. But at the end of the day, it really just comes down to how much your body is producing and how much your body is exerting. Okay. But you have to understand that macronutrients are the baseline for everything. And if you don't really understand them, then you don't really have a system to follow. Because yes, there is an argument to say calories in versus calories out, but there's 1,000 different ways that you can slice and dice those calories that are coming in. And that is based on the biological effect of your body, your age, your hormones, your eating history. Like there's so many things that go into it to decide, okay, your carbs, your fats, your proteins, how can I slice and dice this to match me as a person, not Bob next door, on how my relationship with food is. What am I deficient in? What do I like more of? What is my insulin sensitivity like? Like there's so many things that go into it. And this is where people, I think, really get wrong, is they want to just slash all their carbohydrates. But what happens when you do that? Significant amount of brain fog. Your brain literally runs off glucose. And so when this happens, you find with like keto, you have all this brain fog, right? And people just can't stick to it because they just cut out a major macronutrient in your body. Carbs are not your enemy, right? The problem is you don't understand carbs. You don't know when to eat them, what kind to eat, and how often to eat them. So your body actually absorbs it for energy and utilizes it for recovery and energy, rather than having say, okay, carbs just make me fat, because that is the biggest misconception out there in industry, that carbs are your enemy when they are not. It says, how much should I eat them? How often should I eat them, and what kind, based on my body and how it responds to things. Yes, you can definitely gain weight, eat less. The thing is, when you're gaining weight, what happens? Well, first of all, what is weight? Right. I think that's the bigger question, because weight is, the water in your body. It's bones, it's skin. So what happens when we say, oh, the weight is going up, a lot of that too is just water retention in the body. I mean, your body is 60% water. Okay. I think it's better to understand like how much fat you have in your body and what are the fluctuations that are happening from that perspective. So if you're constantly under eating, you can gain weight because you have higher cortisol levels in your body, and your body is not actually absorbing anything. And what happens is, if you're severely under eating, like I mentioned, you're in this fight or flight mode. So literally everything your body eats, if you're under eating, gets conserved for energy. So you can eat 1,200 calories a day and still keep gaining weight because your body just takes all of that and absorbs it. All right, so let's talk about nutrition based on your lifestyle, because everyone is very different when it comes to this. It's interesting because when I was military, I was a very high active role. When I transitioned from military to school, right, what I had to realize and learning, going back and actually realizing what we're at fail, was that I thought I could do the same things. And I talk about this a lot, is if we do not if we do not know and learn how to make adjustments, how are we going to be able to do this for the next 20, 30 years? Because your roles are going to be changing, your schedules are going to be changing, you're going to get more kids, COVID's going to hit, all these things in life are actually happening. What most people do, I found, is they get just completely overwhelmed, or just say the hell with it and then just stop what they're doing nutritionally. But you cannot do the same thing if you are traveling versus the same thing as a person who is sedentary all day. It's a different lifestyle. So the food you're eating, different. They are very, very different, and the consumption is very different, because you get a guy who's working a 2-week on, 2-week off schedule where he's 2 weeks away from his family, and the sleep is very different and the food choices are very different from when he's home. That is a different process, which requires different level of systems. And what we found is we do not know how to make that transition. So for me, in the military, I could be eating 250, 300, 400 grams of carbs because I'm very active. Well, if I am stationary and very sedentary in my job, I don't need all those carbohydrates. So I don't need to be eating that much. Now, depending on how much is, because to me, I used to be definitely afraid of carbs before military, maybe eating, 50 grams a day. I mean, I'm eating 450 grams today as we speak. Why? Well, because I taught my body how to accept them, and I base it on my activity level, because my activity levels were much different when I was in the military versus when I get into school, when I went to consulting and I started traveling. So when I was traveling, my environment was changing, which means, my sleep was very different. I had more alcohol because out entertaining people. And so my food choices and my habits had to change a lot. So what required of me was, how do I get better sleep, right? How do I manage my water intake and my water retention in my body as I travel versus when I'm at home, when I'm sleeping in my own bed, everything is much different. So if you want to start to manage the social environment with oil and gas, it all comes down to planning, I would say. But at the same time, the steps we're doing in order to manage, I think a lot of it just comes down to alcohol, right? And the foods that you're eating when you're out to eat. So there's two things of problem. It's sodium and it's alcohol. It's the biggest issues that we see with a lot of people. Sodium being because you're out eating, every meal that is pre-made is injected with all this sodium. And your body really you want to keep it between that 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of sodium. And so what happens is, when I'm traveling or when I'm in a very social, impactful environment, water is the most important thing, because what happens is we got to flush all that sodium out. You're traveling, your body's out of its homeostasis. You got to drink a lot of that water just to maintain water fluctuations. And so all that sodium is bad juju. Even if you eat very clean chicken and steak and everything, if you're eating out, you're still is pounded with butters and all this sodium. So if you're able to drink and really double your water intake while you're going through these things, that helps tremendously. But alcohol by far is the most probably hurtful thing that most people are doing in this industry. And here's a statistic. For every 12 ounces of alcohol that you drink, your body stops anything as far as hypertrophy and fat loss for 12 hours. So if you have 2, 3, 4 beers, you just put yourself behind by 2 or 3 days. So why is that? It's because it's a toxin. So your body's literally just trying to metabolize alcohol as fast as it can. And so what we need to be doing is getting your strength training in, getting all your water in, getting all your steps in, getting all the habits that create a healthy environment so that you can metabolize that alcohol a lot faster. But do know, if you're drinking 2 to 3 beers a night, because it's a very social atmosphere. I think the problem is a lot of people, it's a perception problem, right? A lot of people think drinking just to fit in or to land a deal is going to make them, more applicable in the environment that they're in, when it's really not. I think this is a perception and identity that most people carry in this industry, that you have to be drinking in order to land deals. But yes, you can have one or two beers, but the problem is your identity behind it is the problem. And I think that's what most people in this industry have to realize and overcome, is that old shirt and the identity behind drinking alcohol, when really it's just, not it's not making us who we want to be as an individual or as a leader in the business. All right. So I want to call you out for a second. What we find with most guys in leadership positions, alcohol is already part of their identity. But you have to understand that that is not who you are, and is not what got you to where you are today. And I have to have some really hard conversations with people in this industry, guys who are VPs, directors, CEOs, and presidents of companies who have resorted to alcohol as part of the identity. And I'm here to call you out a little bit, because that person you have to get rid of in order to excel and give your leader, give your team the ability to follow you in the right direction. And I'd had some really hard conversations with a lot of guys here recently on alcohol in itself and how it's holding them back as far as the results go, because we can't be having 2 to 3 drinks every single night at social events and expect to get in the best, leanest possible position that you can be. I'm not saying don't drink alcohol, because I personally drink alcohol as well, but I limit it. And I have a standard and a system that I follow, and I have boundaries. As long as we are creating boundaries for people, most people just need systems. And once we have boundaries around those systems, we're able to hold to them. But if we don't have any sort of limits to what we're actually going towards, then it's hard for people to just go down, or it is easier for people just to go down a rabbit hole. So when it comes to my systems around drinking, typically I don't ever say that I'm not going to drink, because I like having my shiners. Who doesn't? But what I do is I base them around more often social events, but my social events has been limited amount since here recently. Went down to OTC, had a couple of shiners from that conference, but I don't drink as much as I used to. But now my boundaries are around social events. And so I always have a hard cap at 2 beers. And so when I have those caps and I have the discipline to tell myself to stick to those things, that is creating mental fortitude and toughness. The problem is most guys don't have the mental toughness to say no, and that is the problem. But we have to start small by creating boundaries. And once we start creating boundaries for ourselves, we start creating better discipline. And once we start creating better discipline, you have the actual habit long term, or even the next week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, to start saying no more often. And eventually what you'll find is you're going to start weaning yourself off of it, and maybe you don't need that anymore as part of your identity. And your body will actually start to not want it. So the more you go into your health and wellness, your training, your water consumption, your food, your body is telling you that it likes this new environment that you're in. So what happens, we don't have that part of our environment, and we're exceeding our alcohol levels. We bring down the boundaries with our alcohol levels, and we substitute it with the right habits with fitness and wellness and nutrition and whole food eating. And what happens is your body is not going to even want it anymore. And I think that's kind of with me, is when I was in that environment, my habits took over as part of the industry that I had subdued myself with, blaming everything around the industry and the environment, when really I was just telling myself that it was okay being the environment that I was in, but it's not, right? I let my environment control me. And that is a problem with most people in leadership positions, is you are letting your environment control you. And that is the identity now that you have around that. And the problem is how we're talking to ourselves, and the self-talk that we have to go through to be able to say, this environment does not control me. I'm going to create boundaries. That is in itself going to increase your mental toughness. Like I was telling my daughter the other day what actual discipline was, and I told her that it's calluses. So each and every day, I have all these calluses on my fingers. Obviously my wife, my daughter think they're disgusting. But what I told her is, over time, these calluses start to build up because it's a daily habit of lifting weights. It's the same thing with our mindset. We have to create an environment where we're building these mental calluses, and we have to start small. And I think the smallest thing to do is create boundaries. You're replacing habits, and that over time, these calluses start to build. And what now your mindset and your mental wellness starts to neglect all of that stuff, the old you, and you're literally over time changing your shirt. And by doing that, you're able to start saying no more often and have the discipline to do so. But the problem is most guys go into like, I'm gonna go cold turkey, not doing anything. It's like I smoked for 15 years in the military. I wasn't going to just go cold turkey, right? So what did I do? Well, I went from smoking, right, to dipping, right, and then I went from dipping to standard straight to pouches, and then I went to pouches to nicotine gum, and then nicotine gum to regular gum. So over time, I was able to quit smoking because it was more sustainable because I wasn't just doing this all or nothing approach with it. So we have to create systems around it. So the biggest thing I hear from a lot of people is that it's very hard to hit your protein. Well, not really. But I think it all depends on how much you actually should need. So for me, for a guy that's 210 pounds, eating 1 gram per body weight can be hard for a lot of people. And what I found is, for anyone coming into things, they're probably eating, I would say the average people coming into our program, even guys who have been training for a long time, never really track food, don't understand what the hell they're putting in their body and don't follow a system, and they're wondering why nothing changes. Well, they're very deficient in protein. So they'll be eating like 130 to 140, 70-ish grams of protein per day. Very low, right? For a guy that's probably 200 to 250 pounds. Okay. So if you're having trouble hitting protein goals, by far, there's a couple things. One, we're not eating enough, or we're not eating as often as we should be. Okay. You can't expect to eat 250 grams of protein in 3 meals. Okay. It's a lot of protein. You're going to be very stuffed, very bloated. So the first step is to start spacing out your meals. Everyone's like, oh, I'm eating, 5 meals a day to increase metabolism. Well, yeah, go back to my other point where the more often you eat protein, the more metabolic you are because your body's just producing more energy throughout the day. So yes, there's just two things that happen with this. By spacing out your meals, you become more metabolic, but you start to inadvertently be able to hit your protein by doing smaller portions throughout the day and not having very big portions because protein is the most satiating thing in your body. So inevitably, by eating more protein, you're going to be super dang full. So what I always tell people is start breaking out your meals more. That's going to help tremendously because you're not so damn full and you can start to add in more throughout the day. But I would say this is the biggest thing too, even for guys that are in our program. Hitting shakes and everything is a great way to do things initially, right? The problem is if you do too much shakes, you're going to be very inflamed because it is processed protein, right? Anything processed, you're going to be you're going to have a lot of inflammation in the body. And so I always tell people really you shouldn't be doing any more than 50 to 75 grams of protein per day. Everything else needs to come from whole food. But I will say this, because I look at probably hundreds of food logs every single day for our clients, the number one issue that I always found is that the servings are just too small. So most guys are doing like 3 to 4 ounces of protein and they're wondering why they're coming up 50, 60 grams shy on the protein of the other day. Well, dude, if you just went from 4 to 6 this week, that's a big achievement. Over 3 meals, you just added 8 to 10 ounces, which is an extra 50 to 60 grams of protein. So I think it really just comes down to your servings. Most guys and most people are eating too low of servings, which is why they're coming up so significantly short. If you just bump those each up over 3 meals, you just added 50 to 60 grams of protein to your meal. So shakes are a good way to get it in, but you have to be very careful with that and what type of protein shakes too, I would say as well, because I had a conversation with a client and he was doing a lot of the premier proteins. Number one, I'm gonna back up a little bit. I had a guy that I was putting up on stage, right? He was sitting at around like 4.5%, 5% body fat, but he looked like he was at like 10. We're like, what in the world is going on here? Right? This guy is very advanced. Wasn't tracking necessarily his, food logs because he's a very advanced guy. He knows how to hit his macros and everything else. But something was off because he was 4.5. The body fat machine was saying 4.5 and the caliber was saying 4.5, but he looked like very watery. Come to find out, the dude was doing 5 to 6 protein shakes a day, right? and wondered why he wasn't looking as lean. It's because he had so much water retention and inflammation in the body because he was doing so much shakes, his processed food, right? It comes down to whole food, the thermic effect of food. So even when you're eating more protein, yes, you are being more metabolic, but the problem is it's still processed. So you're not really capitalizing on the 20% thermic effect of food. Like I mentioned, it's probably closer to around that 10% because it's not, your body is just pushing through protein. If it's whole food protein, it's producing more energy to take all of that and break it down. So that's the number one thing. But the type of protein is massively different because if you're eating protein concentrate, whey concentrate, it is by far the cheapest and dirtiest protein that you could eat, which is pretty much what Premier Protein is. And a lot of the things you'll get like off a shelf of a Walmart, right? So if you do more whey isolate, right, it's a very fast digesting protein. So your body's not getting so inflamed from it. But, there's also protein sources out there like MRE Light. That's like a whole food protein source where it's like a pea protein, chicken protein isolate, beef protein isolate. Those are very good just because it's not a lot of dairy, right? It's still processed, but you're not going to be highly inflamed. So keep your protein shakes from, max 50, 75, increase your servings and space it out more and have more predictability in what you're actually eating. So if you have more predictability in what you're eating, you know how to, this is just the macro game for a lot of people. Like the biggest piece of advice I always give my clients is, you have to have some sort of predictability. So 50% of your meals need to be predictable. So it could be your breakfast, it could be your post-workout, it could be your snack. That's 50% of your meals. You know what you're going to eat, track it the day before. After that, you're leaving open the lunch, you're leaving open your dinners for more flexibility with, whatever the wife is cooking, or if you have a vendor meal or vendor lunch. If you're tracking macros, you're just playing Tetris at the end of the day. The problem is people, if they're having a problem in the protein goals, they're doing no sort of preparation or predictability in what they're eating. They're not increasing their servings and they're just not eating enough throughout the day. Yeah. So if you're wanting to combine more of your meals, so you're not eating more throughout the day, the problem is your body can only break down so much protein at once. So if I had to eat 200 grams of protein per day, and that's what I'm supposed to be eating, I'm eating 2 meals, there's 100 grams of protein per meal. Your body can't produce that or can't break down and absorb that much protein in one sitting, right? You're just going to piss it out is the problem. So the thing is how much protein is very different. Like for most guys, if you're weighing around 175 pounds, you're trying to eat 1 gram per body weight. Well, 2 shakes of that is 50 grams. And now you have 120 grams. If you have just 3 meals a day over 120 grams of protein, that's only 40 grams of protein per meal. So it's really not that much protein if you actually start breaking down things. And that's literally just having like 6 ounces of meat. So I think it's just understanding that how much you should be eating to get the results that you need, and how do we actually break it down. It doesn't matter if it's necessarily 3 or 6 meals, but the bigger the person is, call it 250, 300 pounds, you got to eat more protein. So it might be more difficult for that person. But I think as long as we know, and it's a stepping stone, I don't expect a guy coming in eating 140 grams of protein per day to go eat 250 the next week. There's no way in hell he's going to be able to do it. But if I say go from 130, now eat 170 this week, get your body used to it, understand the systems. And then the next 2 weeks, we go from 170 to 200, understand the systems, get your body used to it. It's really not that big of a deal because if most bodies coming in, they're really, this is a lot of food, Nick. Well, yeah, it's a lot of food because your just gut's just not used to it. Your body's not used to it, but it's actually really not that, because most people, just aren't used to eating good, clean, whole food, and they're going to be very full. But there's always a storming phase with anything. But what I've noticed is there's 2 weeks of storming where most people are going to be very full. But after that, they really start to get used to the process. It's just like anything. So you have to understand the system behind it. So this is why I always preach systems. Okay. If we're flying blind, just shooting in the air, or we're only going to the shoe store and only buy the left shoe, pretty much you're going to the gym, not tracking anything of your food, you're really not giving the body that it needs, anything that it needs to really change. So when I say systems, we really have to understand, how do we control our alcohol? How do we control our water? How do we control our cortisol? How do we control our protein? But if you start small scale fast, you get really good at this one thing, then we focus on the next, and then the next, and then the next. But where I'm trying to get with all of this is that we need systems around food. Those systems are going to be very, very, very different for every single person. And the starting point for point A is going to be very different for every person. And I think once we understand where to start, we know what systems to deploy. But it's not to say you got to do all of this in 1 week. It's understanding that, okay, this is what's holding me back to get to where I need to be, whether it be alcohol, whether it be protein, or whether it just be understanding food in general. You got to start somewhere and obviously scale fast from there. So thank you for listening to the episode. If this resonates with you, if you feel like you're stuck, you feel like nutrition is probably the biggest thing that's preventing you to who you want to be and getting the results that you need to, go to my website, petrofit.info. We can talk about it, what systems you need to be able to be successful. And once we go from there, we understand what a clear roadmap is and what are the milestones we need to be reaching every single day in order to reach this nutritional deficiency that you may be in. So in the next episode, we're going to be talking about family habits. Make sure to tune in.